So this area of the Gemara, being that it's Gemara Sotah 46b, comes in the context of the Perek, which the Perek talks about the requirements of the Eglah Arufa, which is the atonement that a city needs to do if someone has been found dead somewhere within the area of this town, outside in the outskirts of this town, and an atonement and a kapora has to be done via the process of the Eglah Arufa. Within that context, it also then discusses that it is the responsibility of the elders of the city to go out and to do this mitzvah of the Eglah Arufa, which is the atonement for the lack of responsibility with and the lack of visibility of this person, and that this person has now died, and that the elders of the city say that it in part of the process say that they had no responsibility in the death of this person. Rather, they had accompanied them and done something to help them along, and that they are not responsible for his death. Within that context, the Gemara speaks about the idea of accompaniment, and that if there would be accompaniment of an individual that leaves the town in some sort of way, negative things wouldn't happen, and then offers a story about the idea of what can be accomplished via accompaniment. And basically the story is a story from Tanakh, and that story says that this wouldn't have happened if there would have been appropriate accompaniment. The following story wouldn't have ensued. We get a fascinating insight into the story and what happened while we're discussing this story, and the fascinating insight in an action which happened with a prophet. So let's start the Gemara. As the page shows, we'll be discussing this important. So, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Reb Meir. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Reb Meir, Kol she'eina malava umislava, whoever does not accompany another or will not allow himself be accompanied, Ke'ilu shefek domim, is as if, it's not the same, but it's if shefek domim, that he's like a spiller of blood. And as we'll find at the end of the story, that there will be some level of responsibility that's given back to the person who refused accompaniment, and therefore is continued, is held responsible for any deaths that occur as a result of his inaction. And what's the proof? She'il mole lava anshe Jericho. If the inhabitants of Jericho would not have accompanied, if they would have accompanied Elisha, he would not have incited like Geira the Dubin the Tinokes. He wouldn't have incited the bears to attack the children. So within the ensuing verses, we're going to hear the story and how the story developed, and what is the somewhat of the background behind the story. So we're going to go with the flow of the Gemara and see what what the Gemara tells us. As the flow of the Gemara goes, all the details will be given out. So the verse says, Shenema, as it said, and this is a passage out of Malachim. So what happened? V'yal Nishom Beis El, and he, referring to the prophet Elisha, and he went up from there to Bethel as he was going on his way. V'yal Nishom Beis El, B'hu Eila B'derech, and he went on his way. In fact, he was returning to the place that he came from. And what happened was that when the Orim Ketanim, these young lads, Yotzo Minahir, came out of the city, and the Eskalsu, and they started to mock him, the Omrulay, and they said to him, this expression, go up, Ale Kerach, go up the bald-headed one, go up the bald-headed one. And as it's pointed out, had the residents of Jericho accompanied him, they would have sent away these youths, these people who were pestering the prophet Elisha and spoke to him in this mocking fashion, and then they would have prevented the occurrences which the verse tells us about afterwards. What is that? What is that? So now comes the detail. And it starts with what these Naorim Ketanim, these youths, meant when they said their expression. Elisha Aleinu Esamokum. They went to him and they said to him, Aleinu Esamokum, go up, leave us. Because you've done, implying that you've done bad. So when they said to him, go away, the bald one, what they were saying was the one who caused things to be bald. Ola shakachas aleinu esamokum. Go away because you've made for us this place bald. And the Mefarshim tell us that what happened at this place, why did they make the place bald? In what was for them specifically? So there's a number of interpretations. One of them is that they had previously earned their living by providing water to the city of Jericho. Elisha came and he fixed the problem of their water supply. It left them, inverted commas, lacking or bald, without a capability of a parnasa. And therefore they derided him and said, leave us, go away from us. And their services were no longer required. The Gemara inquires and says, what does it mean what is the meaning of the idea of young lads? In other words, to say, Man Na'irim, what is this what's this expression? My v'na'erim katanim. What does this expression mean? These young lads. So we are going to get a number of interpretations. Interesting in this understanding, we're going to get different approaches to what is the problem of what these people have done. So, and these interpretations are interpretations to teaching us that Elisha the prophet could see beyond their regular exterior and therefore understand where they were coming from. But the Gemara has already told us that all this wouldn't have been necessary if accompaniment would have happened. The Gemara continues. The Gemara says, what is the meaning of the young lads, Na'erim Katanim? One would have expected either one of these expressions, but why both of the expressions? If they're Na'erim, which means a young man, a young adult, then you don't need the expression Katanim, small. And if they're small, then why do we say lads? What? We don't need both. So the first one our first answer is Omar Rabbi Elazar, Shemin Neirim min ha-mitzvahs. We have a play on the word Neirim. Neirim doesn't, and say that we can understand Neirim meaning not young, but from the expression of shaken. They're devoid, all their mitzvahs have been shaken away from them. They're devoid of mitzvahs, they have no merits. And further, they're katanim, they're small, they lack any faith. God is the provider of all panosa. God is provider of all means of support. That they're telling the prophet Elisha that you, representative of God, have taken away our mode of parnasa, our mode of sustenance. They obviously showed that their rebelliousness, their lacking of mitzvahs, has reflected to the extent where they lack emunah, where they lack any faith of God. And hence they have no trust anymore. So that's Rabbi Elazar. So Tana and our sages said an interpretation. Na'erim haya, they were young, meaning to say that they were asma kektanim. They embarrassed themselves, but even further, they derided themselves, they disgraced themselves as if they were like young children. So Maskifle Rabbi Yosef asked a question, but Dilma, perhaps they were called Dilma al Shem Kemo. Perhaps that word Na'erim is actually a location, a name of a place, and that they were children from that place. And why would I say that? Don't we find in another source, in a chapter not too far away from this particular chapter, that we've learned an expression that there were a band of Aramites, and the expression was, and the Aramites had gone out in bands, and they're brought away, and they Oram Yotze Gedudim. They went out armies, V'yoshvim Oretz Yisrael, and they brought back from the land of Israel Nairo Katano. They brought back literally a minor young woman. V'koshalon. And the rabbi said that this is a superfluous verse. Nairo v'katano. Both of those words mean the same thing. So Omar Rav Papas, Omar Rav Pedos, he said that this is to teach us that it was Katana, it was a minor girl, the min Ne'irim, from the city of Ne'irim. So why can't I use that same idea that these boys, these lads who were disturbing Elisha the prophet, they were also perhaps from that area of Ne'irim, and they were lads from that city. So the Gemara answers, Hasam le mafarish makemo. Over there, in that excerpt in Malachim base, we don't know exactly where that happened. She was just a girl that was said that the Amoraim brought back a young girl. So therefore, I can understand that perhaps Ne'ira, or I can entertain the possibility that Ne'ira at the moment would be translated as a geographical place. But Chocha, in our verses, Mafarish Mamakemo, it's explicit the place. We know the story, that the context of where Elisha was and where he was coming from, that in fact, although at this specific verse there is no specific place, but we know that the context of where he was coming from the city of Jericho, the city of Jericho, and it helped the water pattern. So it's no good to be able to answer, or we can't accept that answer that they were young lads from a faraway place. So obviously from this place, and this was their issue. Okay, so moving on. The Gemara says, and further what happened in that verse, and this is the incident, what happened as a result of these young lads who were deriding Elisha. So V'yifen Achrov. So what then happened was V'yichen Achrov V'yarem V'yakalelem B'Shem Hashem. That Elisha turned behind them. V'yarem and he saw them. V'yakalelu, literally, and he cursed them in the name of the Lord. And the Gemara asks, Ma Roya. First of all, let's examine the pasuk. Ma Roya, what did Elisha, the prophet, see? So, if the verse is telling us that he saw, well, that's obvious. He turned around, he could see, he was noticing who was bothering him. So we're looking for a deeper interpretation of what's ma'ara'o, what did he see? So Omar Rav says, Ra'o mamish, he literally saw them. But as he saw them, he stared at them. As he stared at them, he understood what was their history. And Kedatanya, as it says, by a great sage, Rab Shimon ben Gamliel, Ketanya Rab Shimon ben Gamliel, as Rab Shimon ben Gamliel says, Omar, Kol Mokom Shanot Nachachomim Einehem, at any time when we say the expression that the sages placed their eyes and saw someone, that they stared at them, that they deeply contemplated about them, there wasn't a good outcome. They either miso, they either passed away, or oni, or they became to the extent of poverty. It says in our works, in our commentaries, that when a person becomes impoverished, when a person becomes poor, that's like it's a death. You take away what happens when a person dies. You're taking away his living, his capability of living. So also when a person becomes impoverished, he becomes impoverished to the point where he has no sustenance. He's like a dead person. So one understanding of the verse of Ma'ara, what did he see? He saw them. Elisha, the prophet, saw them and stared at them. And that staring, that putting his eyes on them, caused them to be in a very negative place, as the verse will continue and tell us. So their actions initiated a train of events. The verse will tell us later what those train of events are. B'shmuel Omar, another sage says, Omaro, what did he see? He saw beyond them. He saw to their history. He saw to their birth that they were shakulam nisabro behem. They were, all of these lads who spoke them were so small in that they were born by their mothers on Yom Kippurim. That is to say, it's saying in a nice way that they were born nisabro, that they became pregnant, that the mothers had become impregnated on the holiest day of Yom Kippur, which is the day when we're not allowed to have any relations, not allowed to have any of the. It's a day of affliction, not a day of pleasure. But those mothers, or the source of where they came from, were people who did negative, even on our holiest day. That influence that those children had bore with them to the point where they went against a prophet of God. And that influence, the way that they were born, their genes, their DNA, how they were born, afflicted them to the point where it came out that they were even against the man of God. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha gave another interpretation. Omanis said, what did he see? He saw that they had beloiris. They were wearing we're going to talk about this word in a second. Beloiris. They had plaited locks, like as if they were like ponytails at the back of their head, and he's raw lahem ka'amirim, and they were like the amirim, like the Gentiles of the people of Israel, the Gentiles nations of Israel, who the amirim, particularly what they used to do as part of their idol worshipping was that they used to fashion their hair in such a way. They used to cut the top of their hair off and leave hair at the back of their heads, and then at the end of a year used to cut their hair and offer that as a sacrifice to Avodah Zarah, to idol worshippers. So therefore, what did he see? He saw that they were doing the opposite. They were people involved in Avodah Zarah, in idol worshipping.
I'm going for the walk.
So they were also against the man of God. And Rabbi Yochanan said, Rosh Elisha behem lachluchia shel mitzvah. He saw about them that they had not even any portion of any mitzvahs whatsoever. The lachluchias meaning even any liquid, it's minimum liquid, that wetness that exudes out of a fruit, exudes out of a ripe fruit or good fruit. There's normally a little bit of liquid. They didn't even have not only something in their center, in their essence, there was nothing about them that had any aspect of mitzvah. Gemara has a question about that. Perhaps Dilma Bazareo, okay, they themselves might not, or perhaps their children, their offspring, perhaps they might have Nahave, perhaps they will have some sort of positive. Omer Rabbi Elisha, that Elisha saw through them, that not in them and not in their children, ad seif kol hadoros, for all the generations, there would be nothing positive, no mitzvahs coming out from them. An interesting understanding of why Rabbi Elisha says lo bom, not in them. We have in our Shema prayer, we have the expression that about the Torah and about living the Jewish lifestyle, you will have to teach your children v'dibarta bom. You have to speak about them. He found in them no aspect of bom. There will be no aspect of v'dibarta bom, being able to speak and teach Torah and pass on the idea of in the morning you shall teach them and you shall do the mitzvahs, or not in the evening when you lie down, when you get up. But dibarta bom, there won't be any aspect of the dibarta bom. So then, because they were devoid of anything positive, and they had enraged, they had gone against the man of God, a miracle happened, a not so positive miracle. But so what the verse continues and tells us what happened post that. It says, "V'tatzaeno shtayim," two davim, two bears came out, min hayer, two she-bears came out from the forest. V'tavkeino mehem, and took of them arbaim b'shnei yeldehem. It took Yelodim. It took, the she-bears took 42 bears, 42, sorry, the two she-bears took 42 children from them. That is to say that that because of the incitement of these young lads, 42 children were taken away. Again, Pedibarta bomb, that bomb is 42. 42 children were taken and tore them. They were ripped away. Two sages debate this episode. Rav and Shmuel say, Chad Omar, one says there was definitely something out of the ordinary. In fact, it was an ace. It was a miracle. Chad Omar nes b'tech nes. And one says there was a miracle within a miracle. Manda Omar nes, the one who said there was a miracle. In what aspect was there a miracle? Says Yer, there was a forest in existence in that place, Yerehava, but David Lehava, there was a forest around that area, but there wasn't any bears located in that area. So within that forest came bears and then captured those 42 children. The two bears which we could say are avenging the